So I'm Lindsey Goldstein.
Woo!
Hi, Lindsey.
I'm a good friend of Anne's for many years.
Many years.
And so I started writing a memoir, and everyone says, a memoir, you're very young, what the hell do you have to write about? But let's see, over 10 years ago, I moved down here to work in the film industry and worked in film development for about 3 or 4 years after working at an agency. And that didn't work out so well, and kind of reevaluated my life, and try not to be nervous.
You're just up on the stage, we're all staring at you, it's fine.
And anyway, I went back to school and got a doctorate in physical therapy. And it's a very big difference. So everybody has asked me what would prompt you to do that, and so I just started thinking about it, and I decided to write a memoir about it. So basically, breathe. Stop looking at me. Basically, the format of my book, which won't come across from what I've chosen to read, is the linear story of from when I moved from San Francisco to LA and I got my first job, and I went through a really bad Hollywood marriage and got divorced, and ultimately I'm remarried. So basically that linear story starts from when I moved here to when I graduated from my DPT program, which is the Doctorate in Physical Therapy at USC. And but I intersperse my story with stories that I gleaned from my patients. So what I've chosen to read today is one of my patient stories. So if it's confusing, read the book when it comes out. So the name of my book is Hands On, and Anne would like me to have a subtitle of Confessions from the Knee, the Groin, or the Armpit, but I'm not sure about that part yet.
Groin! I'm voting groin.
Anyhow, so the name of this chapter is Memory. Oh, thank you. So anyway, I'm going to start. Mr. Romania entered the clinic one day with his wife Eva. I immediately noticed his shuffling gait and the way he carried his cane like a weapon instead of actually employing it the way he should have. He wore an eerie smile on his face and had a wispy billow of hair wafting about his head, but otherwise seemed fairly physically adept. His wife walked slightly behind him, appearing far more wary than her husband. So let me just go back 1 second. When I was seeing these patients, I had to have a clinical instructor with me the whole way since I didn't have my license, so I call her Jane, so don't be confused. Anyhow, Jane approached them with her typical jovial, good-natured self, and together we led the way to the gym. Mr. Romania and his wife sat side by side on a plinth and stared at us. I began the evaluation, trying to ignore the wonky little grin on his face. So what brings you here today, I asked. Mr. Romania cocked his head to the side and shrugged his shoulders. His wife sighed. He loses his balance all the time. Sometimes he falls down when all he is doing is just standing there, she added with a thick accent. I glanced at Mr. Romania. Is this true? I directed at him. He giggled. Okay, that was weird, I thought. I decided to just proceed with some objective testing to verify what his wife was saying. First, I tested his sensation and ankle proprioception to make sure that his was intact. If he was diabetic, there was a chance that both of these sensory inputs could be damaged. Oftentimes, if sensation or proprioception are impaired, a person will no longer maintain good balance. I asked Eva if Mr. Romania had diabetes, but Mr. Romania interjected. Of course I do, he exclaimed. He giggled again. Eva hushed him. He somberly looked at his feet. I proceeded with my exam. I tested his muscle strength next, which wasn't bad other than his hip strength, which was slightly weakened. I asked Mr. Romania to stand and walk down the hall. To my horror, he goose-stepped down the hall. Now, if you aren't familiar with what this means, picture Hitler's army from those old videos in black and white that show Hitler's troops invading various countries during World War II. I ran after Mr. Romania, stopping him short. I saw Eva shaking her head out of the corner of my eye. Jane was looking equally horrified. Where did you learn that? I asked Mr. Romania. He smiled. The German army, of course, he yelped. Other patients in the room started to look around. I studied Mr. Romania. He was 87 years old by his intake form. I tried to get into the German Air Force during the war, but was denied, Mr. Romania went on. Later on, my father was able to get them to change their minds about me. He beamed proudly. I thought about my ancestry. I am Jewish, and although I am not the most religious person, I am proud of what I am. My family doesn't know of any relatives that were currently living in Central Europe during the war, since the majority of my family came to the United States in the late 19th century. But for a second, I felt hatred towards Mr. Romania. I looked at Eva, who was craning her neck, trying to hear what her husband was saying. I decided to rise above and not worry about what this guy was saying. He was still a patient like everyone else, and I was going to take an oath upon graduation to treat anyone despite my own convictions. And I realized that many people fought for the Germans because if they didn't, they would have been killed. So I gave Mr. Romania the benefit of the doubt. As I tested Mr. Romania's balance, I did notice that he had trouble with anything other than standing with a normal base of support, meaning his 2 legs. We went through various other stances, such as single leg stance, which he was incapable of, tandem stance, which also proved impossible for him, and feet all the way together. He was able to stand with his feet shoulder width apart, but when I asked him to close his eyes, he fell over. Luckily, I had a gait belt on him, and I was standing very close. My ancestry screamed, "Let him fall!" but I was able to squelch that down. After discussing the results of the test with Mr. Romania and his wife, he admitted that the worst complaint he had was dizziness. I queried him further. "When do you feel dizzy?" I asked. I also asked him if he had a history of stroke, or transient ischemic attack, or TIA, which is like a stroke, but all signs of a TIA disappear within 24 hours. He told me that generally he felt dizzy when he had been standing for a while. I took his blood pressure, which was very low. "Have you ever used compression stockings before?" I asked him. He shook his head vehemently. "No, they tried to put those on me in the hospital. I hated them," he said. I looked at his wife. "He would benefit from wearing the stockings since his blood pressure is low and it sounds like his circulatory system is not bringing blood back to his brain when he is in an upright position," I explained. Jane nodded her head in encouragement. After learning that they had thrown out the stockings that the hospital gave to Mr. Romania, Jane and I measured him and ordered him new stockings. In the meantime, we sent them away with some exercises to work on at home. The following visit for Mr. Romania proved as eventful as the first evaluation. After the receptionist advised me that he had arrived, I entered the waiting room to find him in a chair, chin tucked into his chest. I noted a faraway look in his eyes and the trademark wispy billows of hair undulating around his head. I stood in front of him. "Mr. Romania, you ready?" I asked. He looked up at me with a hint of recognition on his face, and the loopy smile returned. He jumped up to follow me. Then he immediately sat back down. "Dizzy, Mr. Romania?" I questioned. He nodded his head. I noticed a small abrasion on the side of his cheek then. "Here, come with me." I offered him a hand. He took it and we walked into the gym where I planted him on a plinth. I pointed at the cut on his cheek. "What happened?" I asked him. He touched his cheek where I pointed. He thought about it. "I fell?" he asked me. I shrugged my shoulders. Just then his wife entered. She sat on the edge of the plinth, and I asked her what happened. She had a very remorseful look on her face. "He got out of the house last night," she said as an explanation. I crinkled my brow in confusion. She continued. "Sometimes, if I'm not careful, he gets out in the middle of the night and wanders around outside. I'm so tired because I am so scared to go to sleep. What if something happens to him while I'm asleep?" she pleaded. Mr. Romania innocently looked at his wife. "I wanted to walk outside," he said, and then he started to cry. For the next 20 minutes, Jane and I consoled Mr. Romania. It was clear that the erratic behavior and the uncensored comments were a result of increasing dementia. And here I thought he was just weird. He begged his wife not to be upset with him, but she wasn't upset with him. She was worried. I realized that Mr. Romania's sentence within his mind may have been worse than any punishment he could have had for his role in World War II. This session would be the beginning of my own confusion about how to feel about someone like him. It became clear that he had no remorse about what happened during the war, but then again, it wasn't clear whether his lack of inhibition was actually the way he felt or whether he had just lost his marbles. Mrs. Romania explained to us during that session that her husband had a tendency to wander. We spent our hour trying to brainstorm how to prevent more accidents. I suggested placing bells over the doors so that if exited, she would hear him. She said that when she did fall asleep, she was a heavy sleeper and would never hear the bells. I suggested an alarm system. This was met with blank stares. I could tell that all of my suggestions would go unused. As her husband cried, caught somewhere between knowing what was happening to him and not, and yet feeling completely helpless as a prisoner of his mind, Mrs. Romania patiently consoled him. By the end of the session, I lamely offered them the compression stockings that we had offered for them, and they left, linked arm in arm. Mr. Romania was feeling feistier by the next session. He swaggered into the gym behind me when I picked him up from the lobby, refusing my arm as I offered assistance. He wore a button-down shirt over an undershirt, dress shoes, and sweatpants. Interesting outfit, I noted. After he sat down, I asked, "Are you wearing your compression stockings?" He squinted at me. Then he mimicked me. "Are you wearing your compression stockings?" He giggled. I sighed. Okay, it was going to be like that. Jane pulled up one of his pant legs. The stockings were bunched up around his ankles, clearly not being used the way we had envisioned. "Mr. Romania," I started, "this is not the right way to put these on." Jane and I started tugging on the stockings, attempting to pull them up his varicose vein-riddled calves. My name tag was at eye level with him. He squinted again, peering at my name tag. "Goldstein," he said. He pronounced it with what I interpreted as a thick German accent. "What about it?" I asked him. He shrugged, then replied, "It's Jewish, no?" "Yes, it is," I challenged. Jane gulped a little. I was beginning to see red. I quietly goaded him to continue. But instead, he burst into a giggling fit. He wouldn't say another word, but I already got over any feelings of compassion I had for him during the last session. What a roller coaster this guy was. For the rest of the session, we attempted to recreate a scenario in which Mr. Romania would lose his balance. We took him outside, up steps, over grass, and through a consignment store that is situated near the clinic. I kept myself close to him in case he lost his balance. Overall, his balance was not bad, and he navigated the various settings well. He did tire out, though, and we chose a seat outside the store in order to rest. As we rested, I looked at my feet. When I felt someone peering at me, I looked up. Mr. Romania was staring at my neck. "Can I help you?" I asked. He continued to stare, his eyes glassy. Jane shifted a little at my tone. Finally, he pointed at me. "Your neck is so long and thin," he felt compelled to share with me. I immediately put a hand to my neck, imagining that in Mr. Romania's twisted head, he was imagining strangling me. But no, it got worse. "You know, you would have been chosen by him as someone to propagate our race. Isn't that funny? You, a Jew. But you have all the features, blonde hair, blue eyes." Jane cut him off with, "Mr. Romania, I think our time is up. We need to get back to the clinic." He was not swayed. He kept pointing at my neck and smiling. I was ready to kill the guy, to inflict upon him anything that he might have done to someone back in the day. An eye for an eye is the saying, right? But instead, I had to smile and grit my teeth. I was obligated, as a physical therapist, to treat this guy, no matter what. I grabbed his arm and steered him back to the clinic. He asked Jane, Don't you agree?" She didn't say anything, just smiled and prodded him as well. When we got to the clinic, his wife sat in the waiting room. My face must have given away my anger anyway, because she immediately asked Mr. Romania, "Nicholas, what did you say?" He shrugged innocently. Then he pointed to Jane and said, "Your neck is too short and fat." With that, Jane good-naturedly said, "Bye, Mr. Romania, have a nice weekend." Jane and I made a plan of attack for the last couple of sessions with Mr. Romania. We both agreed that his biggest problem seemed to be what is called orthostatic hypotension, which means that his blood pressure plummets whenever he switches positions or stands for too long, leading to the dizziness that he experiences. The best solution for him was the compression stockings, in order to facilitate blood flow back to his head quickly when he stood up from sitting or stood for long periods of time. His dementia was not something we could do anything about. We spent the majority of time with Eva, educating her on how to easily get the compression stockings on. She complained that since they were so tight and because she had arthritis in her fingers, she couldn't maneuver the stockings up his legs. So we ordered her an instrument to use to assist her with this daunting daily task. We didn't see them again after those educational visits. Each time that we questioned Eva about whether he had done his home exercise program that we prescribed, she apologetically explained that it was hard enough just keeping Mr. Romania safe. She seemed to want sympathy and compassion for her husband, and I decided one can never really know what happened in the past. So I listened to her describe the travails of caring for a husband with progressive Alzheimer's disease, and I found that I really felt like no matter what had happened in the past, this man was truly sentenced with this diagnosis. The allusions that he made to my heritage and appearance were inappropriate, to say the least, but at the end of the day, there was no reason for me to add to their misery. Jane commended me for keeping my emotions out of my treatments with Mr. Romania and for doing what I thought was best for the patient. She said she was not sure what she would have done in the same situation. I told her,
You would never have had to worry about it. Your neck is too short and fat. We both burst out laughing. Did I mention that Jane was very good-natured?
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Lindsey Goldstein, everyone.
Woo!